and the discussion on the agenda is the environment, looking at the scriptures of various faiths. I'm hoping, all being well, that Ali Sharif, a Muslim member of our committee, will be here to speak on the Quran's commentary on the environment. And in the meantime, the Reverend Sunitha will speak on the Buddhist point of view, and I will speak on the Jewish point of view. I think I'll just wet my whistle a bit. Would you like to? The environmental aspect that I initially thought that I would speak about was the creation, but I decided that there would be a lot more meat for discussion in one of the other aspects. And perhaps I should just, before I actually begin, I should explain that what we are going to do is speak for around a quarter of an hour or so each. Then there will be an opportunity for questions. And Linda, is there tea or coffee?
Yes.
And when are you anticipating?
Whenever it's convenient.
So probably sometime between 3 and 3:30. Depending on how we get on, particularly if Ali arrives and he also speaks, probably nearer to 3:30, we shall have tea and coffee and a break. And those who wish to are very welcome then to continue the discussion and the questions. But very happy to have you all here and look forward to an interesting discussion. If I can then perhaps start off from the Jewish point of view, the thought had occurred to me that I might start with the first book of Moses. As you remember, there are 5 books of Moses, and the first book is in Greek is Genesis, which is in the beginning, Bereshit in Hebrew. And Bereshit means in the beginning, and of course describes how the world was created. I thought that we would, however, focus on quite an interesting aspect of the Hebrew Scriptures commentary on the environment, which is the Jubilee. Now you remember that Genesis relates to the first book of Moses and the creation and the introduction of the key players, as they would say today, i.e. the key personalities are 3 patriarchs and the essential establishment of the Hebrew people, of the Israelites, the sons of Jacob, the sons of Israel. In Exodus, it deals, of course, with the departure from Egypt. And the third book, which in Hebrew, because in Hebrew we always call each of the books of Moses by the first word, or first substantive word, of the book. And the third book is Vayikra, which means, and he called. Vayikra el Moshe. And he called, and God called to Moses. And that's the beginning of Leviticus, what is called Leviticus in Greek. And Leviticus is essentially a very long list of laws and rules and regulations. And it deals in chapter 25 of Leviticus, it deals with the Jubilee. Hands up all those who know anything about the Jubilee. Good. I hope I'm sort of preaching to the converted.
In 1995 we probably did.
We might have confused it with another Jubilee. The word Jubilee comes from the Hebrew word Yobel, or Yovel, depending on whether you're Israeli or Sephardic Hebrew. And Yobel means a ram. And you may recall that at key moments in our Jewish year, we sound the ram's horn. Good afternoon, Anne.
Good afternoon, sir.
Please come and make yourself at home. I'm sorry, we had already started, but there we are. This is Ali Sharif, who will be speaking later on the Muslim point of view, dealing with the environment. Yobel, therefore, relates to the sounding of the ram's horn, which we call the shofar. And it is sounded in synagogue on the most important high holy days, principally the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. And it relates, therefore, back, that word Yobel, to the Jubilee, and in turn, this relates to the number 50. And the Jewish religion, the Jewish faith, is very focused on numbers. We have one God, we have the 2 tablets of the law, we have the 3 patriarchs, the 4 matriarchs, the 5 books of Moses, the 6 orders of the Mishnah, and the 7 days of the week. And this in itself was a dramatic factor in introducing a civilizing factor into people's daily toil and labor. When you're working in the fields and hard physical labor, to have a regular day of rest, which relates, as we know, back to when God made the world in 6 days. On the 7th day he rested, and the Hebrew word for he rested is Shabbat, or Sabbath. So in turn, we have a sabbatical year, and it is every 7th year is a sabbatical year, when the fields are allowed to lie fallow. 7 sevens are 49, and at the end of the 49th year, the 50th year, the fields lie fallow, and slaves go back to their families, and the land reverts to the original owners. I should underline, however, the owner of the land we regard in Judaism is God. And so the people who temporarily inhabit the land are, if you like, tenants. So the way that the land of Israel was laid out amongst the 12 tribes was that that land was the land of a given tribe, let us say Dan, Naphtali, Ephraim, or Manasseh, or in the south, Judah and Benjamin. And if somebody from, let's say, the tribe of Benjamin went to the north to Dan and bought land during the 50 years, and let's say there were only 6 years or 7 years to run, it was like buying a short lease. because what they were doing was buying so many harvests. So let's say there would have been 6 harvests left before the year of the Jubilee, when the land went back. And so there was a complicated arrangement whereby there would be a consideration of how much investment had been put into the land and how much effort and work had been put in by, if you like, the person who had taken the lease, before the land reverted back to the original owner, who would have been of the tribe of Dan. And if they'd put in an awful lot of work, they had to be compensated if they were to be told, you know, you now go back to your tribe because it's the year of the Jubilee. So you can see a growing sense of justice and thoughtfulness about the use of the land, and it was also the use of other people, because this also related, of course, to servants and slaves. Now, slavery in Israel was not the slavery that we had suffered when we were in Egypt. So the word in Hebrew is ebed. And when we relate the story of the Passover and the departure from Egypt and to our freedom, we say, Abadim hayinu b'Mitzrayim. We were slaves in the land of Egypt. But when we say ebed otherwise, we don't necessarily mean slave in that sense. We mean a servant. But even a servant, every 7th year, could go back to their family. And a fortiori, at the end of the Jubilee year, they could go back. And it was only in the case of a house in a walled city that you were able to buy the house and say, you know, forever and a day, that's my house, and that's my family's house. But if you were in an open village with no walls, then those houses went back to their original owners. And it's a very interesting concept if you think about it. In English law, we have a celebrated case, several centuries old, when the case is called Thalussen against Thalussen, Thalussen versus Thalussen. And in it, the judges enunciated the rule against perpetuities and the parallel rule, the rule against accumulations. And the reason why was that it is not in the public interest for assets and capital and money and land to revert to fewer and fewer hands. It must go back to the people. And it's interesting that all these thousands of years ago, in the book of Leviticus, in Vayikra, God said, the land belongs to me, not to you. And it must go back every 50 years. So every 50 years, the clock went back to 0. And this meant if people had not made a great success of their lives, if they had lived in poverty because they had not been able to be so successful, in a way, you pressed a button and everything returned to 0 again. And this is a very important concept, both in terms of social humanity and also in terms of, from the point of view of the land being allowed to become fertile again and to take its ease, which we know as the rotation of crops. There's a further similar point. I'm now quoting from Leviticus chapter 25, but also in Deuteronomy, and don't quote me, but I think it's chapter 10. There is a similar interesting case. Deuteronomy is the last book, in Hebrew Devarim, and Devarim is words or matters, and it deals with a lot of different laws, and it reworks some of the early laws enunciated in Leviticus. But one of the interesting ones, just in parallel with the relaxation of the land, is the issue of cruelty to animals. And one of the strictures is you mustn't harness an ox with an ass to pull the plough, because clearly the ox and the ass have different amounts of strength and therefore should not be put together. Likewise, the importance of not mixing different types of cloth together and so on. So there were lots of these rules and regulations, but it seems to me that they provide an interesting background to the way people would think in the future about the importance of resting the land, of resting people by means of the Sabbath, and of the extended Sabbath of the Jubilee. Well, thank you very much. That's a sort of little opener from me on the Jewish contribution, and I'd now like to go on to whichever of my colleagues would like to. Would you like to? Is that all right, Ali? Reverend Samitha, if you would like to now look at it from the Buddhist point of view.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for Linda to organizing and also inviting, taking the hardships to bring us all together, and also great appreciation for the North Hearts Faith Forum, which we all try to uphold the quality and also the availability of the Faith Forum. People like us to come together and share beautiful things in our environment and our life. And also, thank you very much for Reverend David for giving that insightful understanding. And also, it's a pleasure to meet Ali again here in this panel of discussion. Today, the topic is environment. You might have read a little bit of Buddhism. I was born in Sri Lanka. I became a monk at the age of very young, around 12. Then I came 7-8 years ago to UK to do my studies as well as to provide some facilities for our own communities. When we talk about Buddhism, Buddhism was appeared in 2600 years ago. This year is a very remarkable year to the Buddhists because they celebrate the 26th century anniversary of the enlightenment of the Buddha. Normally the Buddhist history being calculated from the death of the Buddha, which is been now 2555 years. Before he was passed away, he was enlightened, he was as a enlightened Buddha for 45 years. So that is being added to the Buddhist era and thereby calculated 2600 years. I think I should stick on to the subject. So Buddhism and environment is very identical and very related because Buddhism is a way of life and rather than a religion, because yes, of course it has been institutionalized and there are monks, there are temples, there are scriptures, so therefore it has been kind of an institutionalized religion, but it is more like a way of life. How to progress ourselves, how to make ourselves happy, and how to make our planet, the place where we all live, a better place for all of us, in harmony, balance, that all can be enjoyed and happy without any identities. I happened to heard a book written by Amartya Sen, one of the young Islamic writer. He wrote about a book called Identity. He won the Nobel Prize for that. He said interesting thing in that book. He said that if you hold on to certain identities, you miss so much, and you lose so much of this very life. So therefore, be open and be liberated to see the beauty of all across. So that is what Buddha wanted to do 2600 years ago. When he was wandering around as a young prince, had a lot of luxuries in the household, but he was felt like enthusiastic, interested about what is happening in this environment. Then it encouraged him to find out the realities of the very nature. He went out and he started doing meditations, through which he came to know about very key, important things about the nature, environment. If we know Buddhism a little bit, Buddha was actually born under a tree. So that is called Sala tree. And he was enlightened under a tree. And he passed away under a tree. He was of course born as a prince. And he was passed away having many disciples, and also establishing a big order of Buddhist teachings. But he was passed away under a tree. So that gives us the combination of the environment and the Buddhism. If you look at myself, you might experience some distinctions. Like my skin is dark in complexion, and some others may be black, some others may be white, and different to each other. My accent might be difficult. I'm sorry if you can't understand certain words. And you speak differently. What makes this? Who makes this? How does this happen? Why we are in that distinctions to each other? None other than, that is, if you can see the high sky, that's the sun makes it, which makes us a culture. There are two different words, nature and nurture. Nurture goes along with the culture, where we have been brought up, what we have been taught, and how we have contributed to us. The nature is identical to all of us, that we all experience in everyday life. So therefore, environment should be holistic, balanced. Unless we are enlightened about that, we can't make the environment which is suitable and applicable to our own well-being. So that is the most two important thing I wanted to mention here. The second thing, the most important key teaching in Buddhism is co-independency. We are not dependents. We do not rely on the environment. We are not independents. We are not totally distinctive two entities from the environment. So we are not dependent, neither independent. We are co-independents. We look after each other and we support for the existence of each other. Thereby we can gain a good quality of the environment and our life. So that is one important teaching in Buddhism, that is codependency, theory of codependency about ourselves and the nature. The another important teaching of Buddhism is impermanent. Impermanent is the nature of changing. If those trees last for all the time, there will be no opportunity or nutriments or other process to support another rainforest to come up. So like we are not going to live all the time, because we are in a cycle of providing the environment or the evolution to take place. So therefore the another core teaching in environment and Buddhism is the impermanent. We need to understand that. If we understand that impermanence, change in situations, we are to have a lot of things. We can make very, very good things. Suppose that today, I am sure many of you have get rid of some televisions in your households, which were analog televisions, we say. Now you all have flat screen, HD televisions, high definition televisions. Now I am sure that some people have the mobiles ringing before we started. They use the technology called 3G at the moment. The best telephone to speak like that, normally people use the iPhones today. In a small object of phone, you normally get at least 1 million applications in it. Few things we hardly use actually. So today the talking about the mobile technology, information technology, they talk about that 3G technology they are using in the phones are not supporting enough for their mobiles now. So they are going to introduce by next April 4G technology. So the one of the most concerns about the mobile companies now, once that is being introduced, you can't watch the television and also keep a mobile with you, because it clashes to each other. So then they are going to spend millions of pounds to sort that problem out so that you can enjoy the telephone and the mobile together. So who is going to pay for that? You all have to bear that expenses. So I'm talking about, when we were talk here, our environment, that is what Buddhism concerns about. When we talk about environment, the trees, rivers, animals, water, streams, ponds, mountains, soil, rocks and landscapes, all we talk about. Those are part of our life, which has a very direct influence about ourselves and those influences. The next important thing in Buddhist practices is the power of mind. The developed mind or undeveloped mind. It has been done so many experiments by different people. One person in Japan, he is a professor. If you Google, you can see a lot of pictures and the experiments he has done. He has done interesting experiment. He took 2 water bottles. He meditated and wished, may this water bottle be well, happy and peaceful. And he did not send the same radiance to the other bottle. So both bottles were frozen in a deep freezer, and after a few hours he took it, 24 hours he took it, and with a telescope he looked at the crystals inside. So he saw that the water is being chanted, prayed, is being very clear and well shaped, but the bottle that is not being chanted or prayed is not being cleared or not well shaped crystals inside. He went on and he asked someone to meditate, come and sit next to a tree, small plant. He put some instruments to the plant and also to the person to measure the vibrations of both. When both objects are 2 different things, like before they come into close, the sequence of the energy was flat. But once they sit closer, it went little high. But once the person started doing the loving kindness meditation, which is may all beings be well, may all beings be happy, may all beings be peaceful, the interaction, connection improved immensely. It says in Buddhist scriptures, when we when we become immoral, when we are not good, it influences to our environment. The crops, the prosperity fade away. But if we become spiritual, if we become more good, then the prosperity, the crops, and all these, even the flowers, fruits get more and become more pleasant in the environment. So what I wanted to mention here, few things, especially in the Mangala Sutta, Buddha says to associate wise, moral, good people is a blessing. And again he says to honor those who are honored is a blessing. And again he says to reside in a suitable locality is a blessing. So if we want to make our planet a suitable locality, we should establish in morals. If we do not establish in morals, we hardly make our own environment a very serious place. Especially even when we were in the household, our families are not talking to each other, having no any morals, having no any communications, we can experience an enormous change of the energy in that household. It will be the same case when we think of the environment as well. That is the Buddhist perspective about the environment. The environment actually in the sense of the whole universe, which includes ourselves. If we think of the energy that we all are particles, little tiny particles, which science explains as quantum physics. That is constantly changing. That is one important thing. This existence exists because of the core combinations. So we can't really live without the support of the environment. That is the nature. But nurture is how we brought up, how we contribute, how we make use of the environment. One Buddhist concept is to be content, is the most important thing. And think really what we want. In the time of the Buddha, I'm not going to say that Buddha was pioneered in introducing the recycling things. Yeah. He even mentioned how to use our robes. This is the robe we normally the monks use. He said that you can to an extent make use of the robe. Once it is gone, you can take it as a blanket. If it is too gone, then you can make it as a rug. Then if it even been worn out, you can make use to cover the walls and make your residence to save from all dangers and problems. So the concept of recycling is very important. Most importantly, I think we can make the greatest contribution if we are content ourselves. Second thing, if we can purify our mind and radiate good thoughts, our life and the environment is very beautiful. So I hope we can make ourselves to create a better world for us to live and make all a better place to live. Thank you very much again. May you be well and happy.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Reverend Samita. Can I now have called on you, Ali, to address us?
Good afternoon, everybody. What we've just thought about is there are three of us here from the Muslim faith, and I have Sister Sandra here, husband Yahya, and myself. Sister Sandra is going to do the introductory bit on Islam in the environment, while Yahya babysits, and then I will do the second bit, and he will then conclude. Okay.
Hello, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for your talks. Sorry, I'm not very good at talking in public, but I'm going to do my best. Okay, we will speak about the environment and our responsibility, as we all know. And in Islam, there is a lot to offer. But everything in Islam goes back, in one way or the other, to the reality, or what we perceive as the oneness of God, what we call Tawheed. So, absolutely every law, every action, or even in our worship, in our way of getting close to God, will go back to this. So, this, of course, goes also into our understanding of the environment and of creation. And we go back to the Quran in order to see what the creation is, what the environment is. And we will find two aspects. There is the aspect of our spirituality towards it. So, for example, we will find that God is constantly speaking about the signs of God, His signs, His attributes being manifested constantly, in the creation. And these signs is something that we can ponder upon, that we can contemplate. This contemplation is by itself a spiritual practice. And a spiritual practice that will help you to see the reflection of God in the creation, so that we see His sovereignty, we can see His power, His compassion, His mercy constantly emanated in the creation, therefore in us. So in creation and ourselves, which are constantly emanating these attributes and manifestations of God. This we call it fitra, which means there is the essence, which means that we come from God and eventually we will go back to Him. Everything comes from one source and everything will have to go back to that source in one way or the other. These points are very important for every Muslim to contemplate. And it will, as we have our way of contemplating as a spiritual practice, we will have the action. For every Muslim, if you have the spiritual base but you don't have the action, it doesn't match. A Muslim has to have an action, which means that it has to, whatever he or she does in life, has to be going back to this principle of the oneness of God, which will emanate His justice in every single aspect. So our thankfulness to God, our way of worshipping, will be to act upon to act upon what we are receiving of knowledge in our observing the creation. So this comes another spiritual practice, but at the same time there is an action. Thankfulness will mean that we will take care of whatever is given to us. So I wanted to bring this spiritual aspect of what will mean to take care of the environment or whatever is given to us. And now, Brother.
Thank you so much. With there's a narration in Islam which talks about living a life as if you're going to live forever, and preparing for the hereafter as if we are going to die tomorrow. It is the first part of this which I think is very pertinent to the environment, is we're going to be living in this world as if we're going to live forever. And we've got to be leading a life that is going to be sustainable. If it isn't, we will be following, as the indictment goes, that we have inherited the environment from our forefathers and we are borrowing it from our children, which is a very, very sad indictment. Sandra just touched on the Wahdatul Wujud, as it is said, the single creation. In addition to that, there are a couple of more important aspects. We are considered to be the vicegerents, the representatives of God on earth. And that is because we are a special creation. Human beings in Islam are called Ashraful Makhluqat, the best of the creation. But with that comes responsibility and accountability. And in the hereafter, we believe we will be answerable for our actions and our use of resources. That is going to be very central. And particularly, I think in the last 50 years, people have become more and more aware. And as time goes, we are having to be more aware because it is impacting on our lives. There are people today who are suffering in different parts of the world because of actions undertaken by people in other parts of the world. The United States, for example, today is 5% of the world's population, while it consumes 30% of the world's resources. If India and China were to follow suit, we would be having difficulties rather early on. So the aspect that Islam talks about is hima, or inviolate zone, and conservation of natural capital, typically fields that David touched on, wildlife, forests, and now water. The next battle that's going to be happening in the world after having fought so many wars on oil is going to be water. Water is a very, very scarce resource, and it is going to hit us sooner than later. In Islam, in the Holy Book, there are some 60 places where God mentions about the importance of water, the need to conserve water, to use it wisely, that it is the very essence of life, and it is important that it is taken forward. And I think in all our conversations, at the end we will have to be bringing it to our current situation and how we can apply all these very profound areas of guidance in our daily lives. There are instances where the Prophet very clearly guided the followers and said, you will not cut down trees even if you are on enemy territory. Now, we know now, science and technology has moved on and says very clearly that with forests, there are so many more benefits. You know, there is regular rainfall, floods are better controlled, and with trees, the biological benefits are not unknown to us. You can imagine, in contrast to that, not cutting trees in enemy territory. And in today's time, we are cutting down rainforests in peaceful times for a very paltry gain, for some profits. We are destroying forests that have taken hundreds of years to grow, with the immense benefit it gives to medicine, to the environment, and the other areas. I will now call upon Brother Yahya to talk about an aspect on wastage and what Islam has to say about that.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Peace be upon you all. Thank you very much for all the speakers, really highly respected speakers who spoke before me, because actually they paved the way for me to save me a lot of struggle. And I'm very thankful that I see lots of common points. All our highly respected speakers, they meet on the point of respecting and having or employing the morality in order to implement our responsibility towards the environment. Now, what we have at the moment what we live in now. We have certain problems, resources that are misused, resources that are wasted, lots of unawareness within the public of utilizing what we are doing around, selfishness, and the list goes on. So what we're living in a real problem. Implementing the moral fact is, I think, the most powerful point that we need to actually utilize in order to ignite that, what can we say, ignite that aspect of moving towards doing something positive towards that. In Islam, we have clear instructions, very simple and direct, and it can, from its simplicity, can include or can comprehend lots of solutions for all these problems. First of all, we're talking about wastage. We have this direct instruction from God: is when you do anything in your life, try to do it in a balanced way. There is a verse in the Quran that is really translated as, don't open up your hand very much and don't bring it near your neck. Then just try to find a balanced way in between. Be in balance. Selfishness, that will be, of course, being attracted to by actually thinking about the others. When you are using something, take what you need and think about the others as well. So there is the issue of wastage. There is an issue of selfishness. There is an issue of awareness. There is an issue of immorality. When you come under a faith, when you come under a moral ideology, this world will diminish, because you will be having rules to follow, morals to adhere to, and then you will have a desire, because you know that you will get rewarded on the spiritual level or on the materialistic level. In Islam, we have, as I said, this very simple, straight, direct way of taking care of the resources, thinking about how to grow it, thinking about the others who are using it, and you're in your way. That's actually the thing. Now, whatever problems that we are having is because of overusage. We are using more than what we need, and we're just wasting for our own profit, or maybe for the profit of very small minority of the people, rather than the majority will be suffering and campaigning and talking in order to preserve something that has been wasted by big companies, big names. And so the problem is very clear. Use what you want, use it in the right way, conserve what we have, and think about the others. I think in that context, that only moral ethics can bring it. You actually don't have to be under any faith institution, where you just need to have this human moral that is actually built into every decent person. And we are all decent. We are born decent. It's just like we change. By our choice, we choose which path we choose. I'm not talking about path of religions. I'm talking about path of actions. Any path you can choose, as long as you are keeping your human instinct. We are all related to each other, despite of the differences, despite of everything that we might have. We are all connected. So we need to take care of each other. We're thinking about what we have, what you actually interact. I'm running out of here.
Yes. Thank you very much. Yes, what I was going to suggest is, it's now 3 o'clock, that I'd like to suggest that we open it out to questions from members of the audience to the 3 members of the panel regarding either what has been said or other aspects from their own faith point of view. And we will try to field those questions. About 3:30, I understand from Linda that there will be tea and coffee and a break. And for those who wish to do so, we're very happy to continue the discussion afterwards. But now I'd like to ask if people could just say their name
I don't have so much a question. I've brought with myself some quotes from Pope John Paul II, who's now deceased, rest in peace, on collection of his sayings on the environment. So if anybody's interested, I would be glad to read some of them for the benefit of giving another aspect. But also, yeah, okay, later.
Okay, but if you would like to read a couple of, would you like to read a couple of them?
I could, if
to
it's
us
appropriate.
now?
Yes, if it's appropriate.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
I mean, there's several. The first quote that was made in May the 8th, 2001, when he made the pilgrimage to Malta. He said, "Look to the future with hope and set out with renewed vigor to make this millennium a time of solidarity and peace, of love for life and respect for God's creation." And then he goes on to later to say, faced with the glory of the Trinity of creation, we must contemplate, sing, and rediscover all. Contemporary society has become dry, not for lack of wonder, but for lack of not for lack of wonders, but for lack of wonder. That he was quoting J.K. Chesterton then. Contemplation of the universe also means for the believer to listen to the message, hearing a paradoxical and silent voice of the Psalm of the Sun. Suggests the heavens are telling the glory of God and the firmament proclaims his handiwork. So it goes on to say, day by day to day pours forth speech, and night to night declares knowledge. There is no speech, nor are their words, their voice is not heard, yet their voices go out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. That's from Psalm 19:2, which you may be familiar with. Nature therefore becomes a gospel that speaks to us of God. For from the greatness and beauty of the created things comes a corresponding perception of the Creator, from the Book of Wisdom 13:5. Paul teaches us that ever since the creation of the world, his, God's, eternal power and divine nature, invisible though they are, have been understood and seen through the things that he has made. That comes from Romans 1:20. But this capacity for contemplation and knowledge, this discovery of the transcendent's presence in creation, must also lead us also to discover our fraternity with the earth, to which we have been linked since creation, from Genesis 2, verse 7. This very goal was foreshadowed by the Old Testament in the Hebrew Jubilee. Interesting, you were mentioning. When the earth rested and man gathered what the land spontaneously offered in Leviticus 25, you were sharing with us. If nature is not violated and humiliated, it returns to being the sister of humanity. There's quite a few other quotes, but you probably don't want me to read all of them, but that is just a beginning.
Yeah. Could I have any other questions people may have?
We heard from the Islamic point of view, I think, that human beings are, I think you said, emanations or expressions of God. Does that apply from within the faith to all human beings around the world? It's not, so to speak, confined to one faith or another. Because that's quite an important realization, I think, for any of us. That, as I believe, we are universally one brotherhood.
Absolutely, yeah. In fact,
Humanity.
yeah, absolutely. The Ummah, as it is called, comprises of all
Yeah.
those believing
Yeah.
in Islam and not.
Yeah.
But Yahya was drawing my attention to the concept of takazul, and I will sort of try to explain further on that. But it is working as a community, as humankind towards this. And once again, it's not sort of one way talking about practicing, and others have different ideas. I think the example that is commonly given is we're all traveling on the same ship. You know, if one community decides to drill a hole in the ship, you know, we all will drown together. You know, we're all into it together. And I shouldn't be quoting David Cameron on that, but it's but it's no, certainly it's this one.
He's asking specifically about the I suppose, yes, what you are asking is that we all come from God.
Yeah.
And absolutely everything in the creation comes from God. And we are in essence related to the creation itself and to other human beings because we have that essence which is called fitra. Our nature, our seed is one in essence. And that's what relates us to other human beings and to animals and plants and to the heavens and the planets and everything around us that is created. And it's our way of communication as well. So when one is able to put apart what differentiates us, one can see the essence in every single aspect of our lives and existence, and one can see that unity with a human being or with an animal or with a plant or with a planet and learn from it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question for you. It could be argued that one of the reasons we're so out of sync with the environment at the moment is because of the amount of pressure put on the environment by the sheer number of human beings in the world. So I'd just like to ask what your various faith views on population control and birth control are.
This was being debated in a parliament in a Muslim country. Not very many parliaments there, though. They're quite autocratic in the way they rule the place. But this was being debated. On one side, when the marriage vows are recited in the mosques, they are told to reproduce and have many more children. And on the other side, the government came back and said, listen guys, we cannot sustain this. Already 60 million people, and anything more than that is going to be difficult to sustain. So we're going to strike a balance. So I think, in short, producing in moderation, I think, would be the answer. Taking the very extreme that India tried at one stage and didn't work, or letting it loose and just saying that God will sustain them all, maybe the other extreme. Interesting to set an angle to that. It's a debate that's happening in quite a few developing countries where the mortality is quite high. And when they have many more children, it's not because they want to have big families, but because not very many of them will survive. So that is their angle. So I think it's sort of producing in moderation.
Well, the situation in this country up to the onset of the 20th century, I know that my grandparents were sort of one of 7 children, or in one case, one of 12 children, of whom 7 survived, and so on. And so there were very similar thoughts about that. But I think there's no doubt at all that today, as far as the Jewish community is concerned, that it is quite normal to have birth control and to limit families without any question.
Interesting, that's a very good question as well. In the Buddhist perspective, actually, We believe that the present world is very much a consumer world, and the statistics comes from to feed that ongoing consumer needs. So when we think of the populations, we always think that it should be maintained in a natural way rather than like the artificial manner. So if we maintain it in the natural manner, there won't be any problems, because if we think ourselves, we have more than enough and lots of being wasted, even in the fridge, even in the households. And you have wasted so much, we have wasted so much because we don't know what we need and how much we need. So when we think of the consumer world, we are being entrapped to provide us more and to gain something to put us in a very difficult track. So we have more than enough. And also when we think of the population wise, as David correctly mentioned, 30, 40 years ago, in some average families, they had at least 7, 8 members in the family. But today it has been well controlled, but the problems hasn't been resolved. So we are experiencing more trouble. But I meant there actually the contentment, understanding what we really need and how much we can. Sustainability is possible in that environment. The Buddhist perspective in that into that question is to be naturalistic. Don't be artificial and try to violate yourself or to control the situations. The moderation comes through with that.
It's an interesting point about moderation and consumption as well.
Of Shanghai, I think, is of the order of 20 million people, and a very large number of them have cars. And I understand from those of my friends and acquaintances who have been there, they say it's almost intolerable living there now. And of course it produces this smog from the exhausts of so many motor cars, and the roads are not wide enough, and so on and so forth. So I think that we just have to bear in mind that the world is a finite resource, and that there must be a point at which, if you like, the famous word is a tipping point, where the population is too great. And this happened in various parts of the world, and I think, was it Easter Island, where they cut down all the trees, and eventually the population simply died off because they couldn't manufacture boats in order to fish, and they had no other way of obtaining their food and so on. And we do have to be mindful of this. And one also has to be aware, it seems to me, when I read the Jewish Bible, the Hebrew Bible, and I think back to a time when there was relatively a tiny population, when North Africa did not have a Sahara desert, and there were many more animals of all kinds which are mentioned in the Bible, and which are in very small numbers around in Israel, in Jordan, and in the surrounding countries today, but which were more prolific in those days. And it is clear that, you know, our environment, the environment indeed in which this book was written, has changed. And as intelligent human beings, we have to respond, and we have to take the, as has been mentioned by so many of you, the morality of moderation and the morality of the unity of our species, of who we are, has to be carried on our shoulders so that we make sensible decisions. And too often, I'm afraid, our governing individuals make what I find are absolutely incomprehensible decisions, and people need to speak out, is the short answer, to protect the world in which we live.
Several comments developing from this, if I may, please. As far as the overpopulation aspects of the world go, there's been quite a lot in The Observer about it over the last week or two. Somebody brought the subject up and the forum against arguments, so if you want to go back to that online to see that. It strikes me, from what I know of all the world religions or philosophies, they were all founded quite a long time ago, thousands of years in most cases, when people living then, you mentioned that the use of the land and the use of animals, they were much closer to the natural world and recognised the dependency that they had on fresh water supplies and fertile soil in a way that so many modern people in our society haven't a clue. You know, they won't even take a walk in the country, you know, they're frightened to go out of the urban environment, I read. There was a survey recently that said a lot of young people between 18 and 25 did not feel safe if they were in a built-up environment. And one young man, bless him, was interviewed and responded to the question, where would you sooner be, inside or outside? And he said, inside, of course, because there's no sockets for clothes outside. You could imagine him sitting with his hood up in his bedroom. And that struck me as being so sad for that individual, but rather devastating for our society. And finally, I can't remember where I read it, it was a long time ago, but I read somewhere that when the white Europeans were taking over the North American continent, the native Indians, American Indians, what used to be called Red Indians, could not understand why the white man had to own land. They believed in the Great Spirit. I don't know how sophisticated that belief was in our terms, but they believed in the Great Spirit that provided everything. The Great Spirit had provided land and water and wood and buffalo and things for everybody. So why? They could not understand the white man coming along and fencing this was off and saying, that's mine, we will kill you. They just didn't get it. So of course they suffered.
Yes, a very, very good point.
I think, you know, my race has a lot to answer for.
And I think though, that this was the, if you like, the emphasis of the Jubilee was really to underline to people every 50 years, which is really, I suppose, I don't know, possibly the lifespan of people. So at least once in a person's lifetime there would be a Jubilee year. And it meant that everybody understood through a collective happening that this land was only theirs temporarily and afterwards reverted back to God. And it seems to me that together with the concept of not tilling and ploughing and sowing and reaping for 12 months was an opportunity, if you like, to think about why we're here, what we're doing, and that there is a finite end to the damage that we do by voluntarily, and it was of course in one sense a voluntary voluntary abstention every 50 years, but also there was a concept of every 7 years. So I feel that the concept of rotation of crops and of the allowing of land to lie fallow makes a huge amount of sense, quite aside from any religious, mandate or instruction that it should be done.
But that doesn't go on anymore, does it? I mean, it must have had to stop at some point. The stopping of the working of the land, and every seventh year you don't work the land, and on 50 years you return it all to the whatever. That doesn't go on anymore in Israel, does it?
No, I have to say, having said that in modern Israel, remember, modern Israel is a secular state. It's not a theocracy. Individual Jews in the modern state of Israel may feel that they wish to continue to do that, but the reality is that the modern state of Israel is like the modern United Kingdom, in the sense that people buy some land and they plough it and till it and do whatever it is they feel they should be doing in accordance with scientific knowledge, the level of scientific knowledge of agriculture or whatever, and they do it that way. What they don't do is every 50 years give it back. To whom? And if you think about it here, where if we would buy a house and it's held in what we call in legal terminology fee simple, it means apart from the Crown, we own our house and we own the land on which it stands, absolutely, subject, if you like, to the Crown, which is what we do today. That happens, I suppose, all over the world now. And the only alternative way of holding land is on a lease, which is for so many years, and at the end of the so many years it reverts back to the person who originally owned it.
So does it create for the Jewish people a moral conflict? The fact that you've got presumed Jews mostly running this republic, sort of government that is not in keeping with the laws of the faith. Is that a sort of a moral conflict going on?
Well, I don't think it is, but I think that's because, in effect, the state of Israel was not founded as a theocratic state. In other words, the state. If you go back to the basics of the laws that obtain in Israel, in the state of Israel today, are a mixture of the Ottoman laws, because the Ottoman Turks ruled all that area, all the way down through Syria, Lebanon, northern what was then Mesopotamia, all the way down the coast to Gaza, and indeed the whole of Sinai was in the Ottoman Empire, and therefore everything was done under Ottoman law for 400 years. Then the British came in, and we had English law and the use of English common law and English statute law enacted by the Imperial Parliament in London. And finally, we have Israeli national law, which again will be partly by statute and partly by precedent, because Israeli law follows very much on the English principle, so you find a precedent and so on. So that is the structure of the law as it now stands, with all its sort of component bits. And the majority of population Well, the population of Israel, that, if I leave out extreme Orthodox Jews who do accept the requirement of the Jubilee.
Really?
Yes. But they, I think, resort to an artificiality, which is that the land is sold for 1 year to a non-Jewish person and then is bought back at the end of the year.
It's an interesting one, actually. It's just thinking from the other side. We are a consumer society, and we would like to have a variety of products as cheap as possible. So there's an element of the economies of scale versus the needs of the environment. And which one wins? Okay. On one side, we have an argument: there's a growing population in the world. We need to feed them. Therefore, must have industrial farming. On the other side, the degradation of the land is happening, and how do we go about with that? An example, the current example is, for example, the drought in East Africa. Not very many years ago, they were cutting down trees and exporting charcoal to the Middle East, which is an extremely wasteful process. Barely 20% of the energy is converted to charcoal. And that was being done. Now you cut down trees, you don't get rain, and decades down the line, you now have a drought. So it's those sorts of things. And again, I think even in terms of policies, we're going to be insisting them on the ground to be doing this. That do not cut down trees. Let's look at alternative ways of providing fuel. The deposits of coal in East Africa use natural coal, but do not produce charcoal. You're cutting down forests. So much more damaging.
You're talking about alternative sources of energy. One of the priests that we've got in our parish is actually from the Congo, and one of the problems that he has in the little village that he's come from is that they have got no electricity. Now, his one pet project was to provide a small hydroelectric power, a dam, in a river nearby, about 10 kilometers from the village, to bring electricity to the village and stop a lot of the pollution from burning and running diesel generators that are costing them a fortune, and their revenue from, that they need being eaten up because, like we know, diesel and whatever prices are skyrocketing, and it's difficult to get into the center of the Congo. And but in a sense, however much that is need, human ingenuity and technology, we're on about different generations of televisions and iPods and all of that, has been superseded by the availability now of solar power. And they've started preparing the work for damming this river, which would give them energy for industrialization should they raise the money for that, but which they're struggling. But at the same time, they could almost provide for quite a lot of their needs by providing solar power, sort of thing, which it's not pollution free, because there's still the pollution incurred in the mining of the minerals that goes into making solar panels and making them and all of that and providing them. But the long term is, it's an alternative form. And you're talking about there's coal and there's oil in other parts of the world. I think from where I sit, we need to look at, actually we need to stop using coal and oil and gas burning as a source of energy. And how many of us think of solutions to so many of the problems, even to the supply of energy to our houses, by thinking solar? God has given us the sun. As we talk about creation very often, I find, as if God only created the planet Earth. Actually, the planet Earth is one just small part of the enormous creation of the whole universe, and the sun and the energy from the sun that has been sustaining us through plants is still out there, sustaining us day in, day out, and it shines on the to quote, like the rain on the just and the unjust.
It's an interesting point, Dorinda. I was reading an interesting article on this. They call it the energy trinity. We need three things together. With energy, we need it to be cheap, we need it to be green, and we need to be secure. Okay? Solar power is not cheap.
Oh, I don't know.
No, I know it.
I've got it in my house.
I tell you, it is 25 pence per kilowatt. I'm paying 11 pence today. Why should I pay 25? Okay, one. Number two is that it's what happens when the sun does not shine. Okay, you need to have power storage.
Yeah.
You then need inverters. Okay, so all of that costs. And all of them put together, at the moment, it's not an easy convert. You just can't convert entire economies to move on solar power. It will be. The economies of scale, when more and more is done, the prices will come down. And that is the future. Mind you, I agree with you, it is the future.
It's like, for instance, when you feed yourself, you're providing energy to your body, you know, to power up your body so that you can live from day to day. You would never think of powering your body with just potatoes, or just pasta, or just meat, for that matter. I mean, not carnivores. So we look at powering our bodies with a variety of sources of energy. We like a balanced diet. You know, why do we think that we need to power the needs of the world, the human needs in the world, with only one type of source of energy? We need, like you said, a balance. It's got to be, if you haven't got sun today, maybe we've got wind, maybe we've got geothermal, maybe we've got something else. And we need to learn to think of feeding our need for energy on the planet, not with just one source, but just like our food on our plate, a little bit of everything, and to meet the need. And in that way, not put overburdening any one source.
I think it's called the energy mix.
Yeah.
We have nuclear power, coal. Sorry.
I'd like to thank all the speakers. Very thought-provoking. Everything that's been said. So many thoughts coming out that it's difficult to sort of respond off the cuff, really. But there are two thoughts that occur to me, and that is specific to this forum, of course, is that the one thing we all have in common is faith. Yeah. And if we're looking at our relationship to the environment, there are two other realms of social life which we need to work with. One is the scientists, and the other one are the politicians. Yeah. And the relationship between the faith groups and the politicians is one which I find very stimulating in what you've just been saying. You know, I've been thinking of so many different things to say or thoughts that have occurred. And the relationship between ourselves and the scientists as well. I mean, we're getting into some quite scientific discussion now. But the point here is that what is the role of us as faith? I mean, in our other lives, we may be involved in politics or we may be involved in science. But here, we're involved in our faith and what we have in common. I would just make two observations. One is that some of our very atheistic scientist friends will talk about morals and ethics and all that stuff, but they don't have this underlying theological and spiritual grounding that we have. And I think that's something which we must bring that to the debate. And the second thing I would say, and it stems from what Ali mentioned about water being the next big problem for the world, and that is that we don't. Let's face it, we're living through a relative period of world peace at the moment. We do have a few little wars around the place, but nothing like the last century or some of the previous centuries. And a large reason for that is because we have these nation states, which have become fairly well established. But whether the nation states will survive the next century is another matter, because it's international organisations which are going to have to solve these problems. Certainly the water problem, these are problems where one member state is taking water from other member states. And it's the strengthening of international, and this is where I come onto the political arena, as it were, that the strengthening of international organisations and agencies has to be something which is going to have to happen if we're going to do something about the environment. And let's face it, our faiths are already international organisations. We're already well established and very strong international organisations, albeit not in the political sphere. So I just wonder whether, as faith groups, we can bring something to contribute to that debate as well.
we can support a campaign. It says don't drop the ball on climate change, and it's aiming at encouraging our government towards the summit in Durban. Remember Copenhagen 2 years ago?
Yes.
And all the campaigns around it, and then Mexico was a bit of a damn squib. Well, we're hoping this year to pester the government and to get the climate change summit in Durban to not be ignored, and to get. So I hope you all support. I will be starting this campaigning locally. I mean, bringing it to Hitchin at any rate.
Well, thank you very much for your contributions. If you would like to have a break for tea, and we could then discuss your point further. Thank you very much.
Can I just say a small point before it's a food for thought, before the thought for food takes over. Bring him to Devinder's point. I think it's thinking globally, but acting locally. And with that, I'm just wondering, when I go to my mosque in Hitchin, why is it not powered with solar power? Why are there no heat pumps for warming it up? Why are there no solar thermal to give us hot water? And so on and so forth. Now, if we have belief and say that this is going to be a sustainable world and we're going to move on, if we practice it ourselves and have it in our places of worship, rather than us having a conference once every 2 years, or me going to the Centre for Appropriate Technology in Wales once a year. This will hit me every Sunday or every Friday when I go to the mosque and I see a solar panel. I must have this in my place. And I must practice that locally. Because with that, when many more people start using it, we get the economies of scale, the prices come down, and people start accepting it. Things that are considered not very pleasant, as such as wind turbines, etc., people will accept this is the future. We need to move in that direction.
I mean, the irony was that recently there was on the news that some farm in Cambridgeshire or in the East Anglia at any rate had this to become an energy farm. They'd put all these solar panels. You may have all seen it. And I thought, how ironic is that? We've all got roofs, many of them pointing south. If all of those solar panels, people stopped objecting about solar panels on their roof and put the solar panels on the roof, that piece of land could be generating food. Why are we wasting a piece of land with solar panels and covering it up so that, and instead, why don't we just agree that we'll put the solar panels on the roofs, stop objecting to them, use the land for trees, for plants, for whatever, to improve the environment.
Flowers for insects in between, that's all that. And they were planting wild flowers in between the gaps of the solar panels.
Yeah, but I mean, the solar panels can be on the roof, the whole field could be wild flowers.
Wild flowers as well for the insects. Try telling people not to kill a bee because it's going to pollinate their food. And they get lost. So we need balances all over the place.
One last point before just a few seconds actually. One interesting thing came up from that side, talking about the environment in our household. If we can see here, we all are kind of middle-aged people. We don't have to be taught, we can ourselves rationally contribute something positive to the environment. But as you said that if somebody being asked from a teenager where you should stay most of the time, they will say inside because they have available all these sockets and things. Most of the things like in the household environments, games and other computer things has totally changed the understanding about the younger generation. As people who have the faith as well as the rationality to work for the environment, I think educating young children, delusion, not being understanding, not educated is the most concerned problem in the environment. If we can make our younger generation understand that can be done not to the government, of course that has to be done by the politicians, the scientists, but parents, brothers and sisters, elders can do this, especially as the faith groups. We can educate our younger people. That is the future generation. So if we can, because of the violence, that is a part of environment. You talked about the security going out in the forest, even at dark times. You don't feel safe. That is environment. You don't, few years ago, we didn't even had some locks in our doors. Today, you have at least 3 locks in the room. So that is our environment. This is being corrupted. So therefore, I think delusion, faith and education is the most important thing. Let us bring that into our younger generation before we go to tea break.
Right. The matters that have been aired both by the speakers and indeed by other members of the audience, do please feel free to do so.
It strikes me that we all share a very similar concern for the environment, and but the trouble is what to do about it. And how can we put it across? I was talking to you, David, about China, for example, or other countries that haven't had cars, for example. We have cars here in this country and in the West, and we know how useful they are. So who are we to say, no, sorry, you shouldn't have that many cars? You know, that doesn't seem fair. So how can we encourage a new form of technology that doesn't use petrol or different alternative ways of using energy? And free market indeed. I mean, I'm sure we all believe in a free market. How can we encourage people to in the right direction, shall we say?
I think one of the things that we've seen all through human history has been the ingenuity of the human mind, and this has been allied to the desire to chase a profit, and therefore the incentive either to save money or to make a profit from going in a certain direction. Governments have certainly tried to develop public policy in certain directions, so by taxation and by tax reliefs and so on. We can already see a succession of things happening, it seems to me, that being aware, first of all, being aware of the pressures in terms of petrol-fired motor cars has resulted in a greater desire to use public transport, and this has meant that the trains are much more used. I've noticed over really quite a number of years now how full the trains have become, and the need, which didn't happen certainly in the 1980s. There was a dearth of investment in new trains, and yet it's clear that one of the solutions is more people using public transport, i.e. communal transport, in order to support this. And the second element, it seems to me, and this is where I'm sort of thinking along the lines of human ingenuity and technology, is of course things like the electric car and the hybrid car and so on. And these are all things that are ways of bridging the gap in some way, shape or form, bearing in mind, you're absolutely right, that we enjoy the freedom which using our own motor car brings us, and the independence. I remember when my late mother, we gradually persuaded her in her early to mid-90s that actually it was better if she didn't drive the car. And she initially felt bereft of her independence because she was running her own life, and yet in fact people would have been only too delighted, and were delighted, to drive her anywhere that she wanted. But the reality is that we do treasure our independence because we have a motor car. and that, of course, has become every man's. If I go back to the early times of my life, and I'm sure yours, I remember when there might have been only 2 or 3 motor cars in our road. And at that time, it was absolutely an exception that somebody had a car.
Yeah.
For most of us, we had the bus or Shanks's pony or a bicycle. And bicycles also, of course, are coming back very much so, although I gather they are now exceedingly expensive. But all of these are manifestations, it seems to me, of human ingenuity, and it's one of the things that gives me hope and faith in the future, is not only my own faith as a Jew, but also my faith in the human race, is that people will have the ingenuity to see the way forward in time. Yeah. Yes.
I would like to draw our attention to the way we eat, which is also, it can be a very corrupted way, I suppose, for all of us, regardless if we are Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, Jewish. If we choose to be meat eaters, what is the way that our meat is being produced and the damage that it's doing, in the sense that if it is being produced in an ethical way or not. And we have certain aspects in Islam which will make, as in Judaism, which will make a meat legal or not, but it's still, because of the industrialization of meat, now even our own meats that we consider legal are starting to be non-legal because they are not ethically grown. The same thing happens when you choose to be vegetarian, because you may be vegetarian, but the way that the grains and the way that vegetables and fruits are being grown are not being grown in the ethical way, which is actually good for the soil, or is actually good for our environment because of the use of oil and petrol for all of it. So I wanted to see what you would like to talk about. Our way of eating. We are what we eat, isn't it? The people say. And it's so important in Islam. There is a constant, even in the prayers, that is saying, don't eat the corrupt. Now we need to understand what corrupt means. Is it only that you go and kill the animal in one way? No, it means that the way that the food was brought into you, front of you, you got it by good source of money, and you didn't get it by a bad business or something like that. So you pay for it in a good way, to being correct, being straight, or it also means that piece of bread or whatever comes actually from good sources, which are not also corrupt. It becomes very complicated for a Muslim person to eat nowadays, I suppose. So I wanted to ask about this for
Ali. I don't know whether you have a comment on that.
As we get on to the fast lane of our lives, we tend to overlook many more important aspects. So it's right from the very source of the income to after purchasing the product itself, whether the farmer is getting the right price for it, not fine, is it being grown correctly or not, the use of fossil fuels in the process. And at every angle there are debates. It isn't a simple answer, unfortunately. Should we be, besides food, should we be importing flowers from Kenya? When I go to Nairobi, there are 5 flights leaving every day with flowers coming over to Europe. And we say, well, this isn't right. They turn back and they say, what happens to the small farmer who grows the flowers? You're depriving him of an income.
Yes.
So there are 2 sides to the story there. But it's interesting to see the viewpoint of others. David, on the side of...
With regard to the food, and especially mentioned that we are what we eat, actually. That again provoke the thought, do we live to eat or do we eat for living? And what we slightly think otherwise. We think we are what we think. That is our way of understanding the situations. If we think rightly, we choose it and we make ourselves righteous in our actions, in our food, in our livelihood. Especially today, we make, not today, even every time of our evolution, the beings have been make their lives comfortable, easy, and make them feel convenient. That is why the cars and all these things come into being actually. If we think about our necessities rather than indulging and overindulging about all what we need, we can make a better world. For example, somebody who went to the, I read it in the newspapers, who earned quite a lot, happened to park in a disabled area and pay the penalty of £60, which is nothing. He earns nearly £150,000 a year, a month. So he can pay easily that penalty and park, make himself convenient and walk into the pub. In the same time, he nearly 50 yards, 100 yards, there is a car park that you can easily park for £2 or £3. That is how we have to, that's what we are think, what we think. You know, if we think rightly, we can change the situations very, very conveniently. Similarly, food is a vital part because it is a basic human needs. The whole environment, so there is a story called apple eaters. If you go to an apple tree and shake the tree, and there will be so many apples dropped down, but you have to think how much you are going to eat, and rather than waste it. With regard to the vegetarianism as well, also the same actually. I know that in Islam that Ramadan is coming, the fasting season is coming.
You're reminding me of something starting on Monday. I was drinking my coffee 2 or 3 minutes ago. Yes.
So therefore, you know that we have golden things within us. The lack of what we need is actually understanding this and putting into practice, educating our society. We are people who always demand and complain. And if we can start from ourselves, we can change this world.
It's a very interesting point on that. Just from a very different angle. There was a natural disaster last year. I don't remember the specifics of it. But people were asking, what is the British government going to give to help? And while they were still debating on it, we're in a financial crisis, I don't think we can afford it, it's all difficult, we're cutting our services. People on the street started gathering money. And we raised £50 million, and the government said we will match it. They were embarrassed, they had to do it. They had to do it. The money came from somewhere, we're still in a financial crisis, we managed it. So I think taking the lead on that is so important. And that is where the other things come in. We talked about alternative sources of energy and habits, people's habits and cultures. How do we change that? If people make a move in that direction, if they vote with their feet, it makes such a big difference. Because of that argument, like you talked about China as an example, David.
Yes.
You know, even if they use electric cars, even if the source of their power is green, which it isn't in most cases, there isn't the space. 20 million people in Shanghai all driving cars. They have the roads to drive. So something's got to give in the process. People that start using the trains and the like. I drive the car to London quite often, and I hate it because I can't read while I'm driving. I can't use my mobile. I should be using my mobile. And I'm focused on doing a thing which is so mundane. I'm not allowed to do anything else. I shouldn't be talking at ease with my friends in the car or whatever. But if we all decide to go on a train and get on to that, that would be a way forward. So that's changing habits.
Yes.
Yeah, can I just add? Recently there was a program that I watched. They're looking at the change of even attitude, even within China. And much to my surprise, there's apparently there's been a sort of according to this program, a change of attitude that China up until in the past had an attitude of wanting to be the biggest cat in terms of catching mice, the sort of most efficient, most whatever. And that was its approach. In terms of industry, it was going all out, wanting to be the biggest cat around. Now the attitude is, yes, we want to be the biggest cat, but we want to be... No, I beg your pardon, we go back a step. It didn't matter what color the cat was, they just wanted to be the biggest cat. Now their attitude has changed to, we want to be the biggest green cat. And that's their attitude. To the point where, much to my surprise, there's been struggles, for instance, here in this country to build windmills. Anyway, you want to put a windmill anywhere, there is endless objection. Well, in China, they're putting the windmills up at the rate of 1 an hour. It doesn't matter, they're just doing it. You see, we complain about other people, and in a sense, we look back at. I can only speak as a Christian. That one of the teachings of Jesus Christ was take the plank from your eye first before you try to help to remove the splinter from your brother's eye. And in a sense, we need to take the plank from our own lives, our waste of energy, the sources of energy that we rely on, before we point the finger anywhere else around the world. And that is the kind of attitude, whether it is about food, where the sources of food or where our energy comes from, how much we buy, how much we can live without. There's been so many campaigns in the past. There was one that was live simply, so that others may simply live.
Yeah.
And it was by bringing awareness of resources of the planet, what a confined environment is, the earth, and we're here to share it with everybody, not just be greedy, like you've been on about, as you were saying. And it goes back to the teaching of the living. The sort of moral teaching of living for the common good, working for the common good, or using, that sort of awareness. But yes, the idea of 1 windmill an hour is quite a thought.
And obviously there's no problem about planning permission.
No. See, we've got a need, which is more important than the planning permission pass.
I think on the other hand, and it's one of the issues that we in this country have tried to focus on, and I feel people in general have gradually come round to the idea that part of their lifestyle or part of their lives are things which are either not easily tangible or expressible. But for example, I was reading a piece, which I'm sure some of you will also have read, from one of the supermarkets about dragonflies, and that they are encouraging the dairy farms that supply them with milk to set aside land so that dragonflies may flourish, and they need certain environmental requirements. And you might think that dragonflies are of no account, but apparently they are the main food of a certain small type of falcon called a hobby. And if you want to see more hobbies, you need to accept that you need to see more dragonflies. And there's this chain of events going all the way up through. And if you have more hobbies, you have a more flourishing countryside with more wildlife and so on. And to the extent, I know from Linda and I, when we drive through increasingly the edges of Hertfordshire and into Berkshire and Buckinghamshire and so on, and we see more of these red kites. They're magnificent creatures, and they're part of our, our human experience. And so we can't be, to take dear Linda's point, we can't be too judgmental about other people if we need to understand the kind of environment in which we wish to live, and we need to exercise the restraint and the forethought and thoughtfulness which perhaps I referred to earlier when I referred to a verse in Deuteronomy which referred to the importance of not harnessing the ass with the ox, because you thereby induce cruelty and an imbalance in trying to plough with an ass and an ox.
Can I
yes.
mention something else? Sorry. There was a program made for the purpose, in terms of educating of the environment. It's part, I don't know how many of you know about Operation Noah? Yeah, they've got a little video clip on it starts with a person going to confession to a priest. Now, there may be other ways of, in the Muslim faith and the Jewish faith, of how you go maybe to the temple and tell you, make reparation for your sins, your whatever. And it basically was saying the time will come, will we see people going up to confession and saying, "Bless me, Father, for I've sinned. I've driven my car and I've turned on the kettle, and wasted electricity more than I needed and all of that." And the priest will give you as a penance, not go and say these prayers or that prayers and go and plant a tree. And it kind of got us thinking in terms of our relationship with the environment, in what way we are sinning towards the environment when we ask more of it than what we need, sort of thing. And the need to make reparation in a way that up until now we never thought. We've often thought of sin. I know, for instance, from the Old Testament, there's an awful lot of killing animals to pay using their blood to pay for sin. And I don't know whether within the Buddhist faith or the Muslim faith or even in the Jewish, if there is a change of mentality that says actually the time might come when we will not be killing, destroying or whatever, but we actually have to make reparation for our consumerism sins, our damaged sins of the way you burden and destroy the environment, by actually having to do something to mitigate the damage directly.
There's a big element of waste in Islam. And if you think about the same approach, for example, taking waste a stage further, where I'm using a resource which is not renewable, a resource for which I'm not paying the right price, a resource which is not secure. So I'm having to make sure that there are governments overseas that are they're not democratic, but they're very convenient to us because they supply us the fuel at the price that we want to have them. All these are actions that are morally questionable. They are morally questionable. And how do we conduct ourselves? And in Quran, it's a very straight ayah to say that those who waste are agents of the Satan. Coming on our side here, the government has started a big scheme of, for example, insulating houses so that we reduce our consumption. I may correct myself on that. Dear Linda, before the break, I talked about photovoltaics being more expensive. The government has got a program which is called FIT, which is feed-in tariff, and they pay a much higher price for the energy that is produced from it. But in Germany, which is really into renewables and the like, their feed-in tariff program, while we are starting in 2011, theirs is 20 years old. And their next aim now is on conservation, on reducing of waste. And they say by virtue of doing that, they're doing a few things. One is the energy consumption will drop. They're going to produce very high quality jobs in the process. And thirdly, they will save on installing new power plants altogether. Because any power plant in a situation, if you think about using gas, produces. If you have coal, it has got its problems. If you have nuclear power plants, well, we know it all now after Fukushima. Okay. While we are talking about new power plants, they are talking about not needing them by virtue of conservation. So think of it from that angle, rather than a balance, the benefits that it can impart on the environment, to people, in terms of jobs, and the future generations.
But I mean, you could, see the by, for instance, going out and cleaning the common, or going out and working in the land as actually a way of repairing some of the damage that we are doing now in some other way.
At one time, a long time ago in this country, everybody was sort of the vassal of a lord in the feudal system, and most people were peasants, or whatever you call them, villeins. And if the lord said, we're going to grow this, we're going to grow that, that's what they grew. And basically, you didn't have them with the rights. Probably a lot of the landlords were good people. Probably a lot of them were pretty rotten so-and-sos. And we look back now and we think they were all rotten. But, you know, it probably wasn't as bad as we sometimes imagine. That broke down gradually, and probably continued in practice, even if not in theory, in the country and for a long time, until the Industrial Revolution. After that, there were some terrible factory owners, but there were also some good factory owners, and it has to be said, a lot of them were Quakers, who really looked after their people and built the villages and looked after them there. And I think if we had either of those kinds of situations now, probably the lord of the manor or the factory owner or whatever would say there's going to be a windmill over there, and the people, they might not like it altogether, but they'd see that he was looking after them in general, and they'd put up with the windmill. And there would be one power station, there'd probably be one heating plant that provided the hot water to everywhere. And I know there are some places where they do have communal heating systems, that what they call combined heat and power or something, which feed to people's houses, and that's largely done voluntarily. The trouble is, we all want to live in our own house and to be the lord of our own little patch of land, even if it's only a few tens of square yards. And we don't want to be under the boss, however benign he is. And yeah, I come home from work, I don't want my boss to be saying what happens in my house or how I get me water or whatever. And I don't want to live next door to all my colleagues, but maybe it would be better if I did. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't get into that kind of system without everybody else agreeing to it and everybody else isn't going to. Yeah, I don't know what the answer to this is, but that's part of the problem, maybe.
It's all of a piece, it seems to me, with the issue of personal freedom.
Yeah.
And I remember going to East Africa just over 50 years ago as a young man. And I went round what was then Kenya, Uganda and Tanganyika. And the issue, it seemed to me, was not whether Britain was running these territories well or ill. I could see that, according to my lights, Britain was running these territories very well indeed. And in fact, Kenya was a net exporter of food. It was, in other words, it was growing a surplus of food to what its population could eat. The trains ran on time and everything was just so. But the desire of everybody in this world for their freedom is such that it would have been quite outrageous for us not to have allowed the peoples of those territories to have their freedom. And so the freedom to do things right and wrong, it seems to me, is something that if we want to have it ourselves, then we need to ensure that everybody else also has that freedom. And sometimes, you know, it's used wisely, and sometimes it's used unwisely. And that's why I think that although it would have been, I'm sure, much better organised if we'd stayed with Lords of the Manor and serfs, because it would have been much more efficient. But it's not. It wouldn't have been a recipe for happiness. And I think that one of the things that Reverend Samitha, you touched on most importantly was contentment and happiness. And I can't remember which nation, was it the Danes, they said were the most happy in the world or in Europe. But I do think that personal happiness is a very important component we mustn't lose sight of. And it's covered in the Bible, in the scriptures of all the religions, because personal contentment, remember, the desire of each man to sit under his fig tree and so on, is terribly, terribly important. And as I say, you know, we live in an imperfect world, and so sometimes we have to accept that the most efficient, the most green, etc., is not going to happen.
Is happiness necessarily found in individuality? Is it found better in community?
Oh, indeed.
People object.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Not them far enough, but not too far.
Having been brought up in West Yorkshire, which some of you might know used to have a lot of coal mines, wind turbines are a damn sight nicer to look at and less bother than coal mines and coal pit accidents and slag heaps and a few other nasty things like that. The number of men of middle age who were laid off because they had lung disease and that because they worked down the pits. I mean, get rid of coal and have wind turbines any day. They may not be perfect, but there's a lot of coal mines. A lot of them.
Absolutely, yeah. There's an interesting incident in Tanzania where I was born with windmills. The Germans came to a village and they said, you need a windmill here. So they went to the local Maasai village and installed a windmill. And said, why? Because you need to pump water. It will save you petrol, generator to have the water pumped out. The windmills will give you reliable water supply all the year round. And the people just kept on nodding, and the Germans came in and installed the windmill. And then they left. 6 months later, they sent a team down to do a review. You know, how many liters of water have been pumped, what has been the effect on people's lives, because the mortality rate should be reduced and all of that. And they saw no windmill there. So the guy said, no, there's a mistake. We're going to the wrong village, it seems. And they called the chief here and said, so what happened to the windmill here? Is this the right village? He said, you're in the right village. We did have it here. So what happened then? So the people decided there's a better use of the windmill is to take it down and make arrows instead. Okay? So there's an element of power. Were the people consulted? Were the benefits? The benefits they were thinking. They were thinking, we are fine enough. We will just draw water from the hand pump that we have or whatever. Why do we need a windmill, etc.? So people come in different ways. In China, enforced installation of wind turbines. Here we have planning permission and not as many are being installed. In Africa it was installed and then taken down. So
no, likewise actually, even if when we consider about our day-to-day life, if you think of just your telephone, how many calls comes in from outside just to sell something out to you without any concerns. But sometimes they are fishing, sometimes they take them on board and maybe selling you something which is really not useful and making some money. Likewise, there are so many organizations and companies to corrupt situations. And at the same time, when we think of the natural resources in the environment for our better survival, morality is very important. Faith is very important. If we have sense of faith, our environment gets naturally much better. If we deteriorate our morality, if we overindulgence and abuse, a lot of violence, corruptions taking place, then we are in a crisis of environment as well. The third thing I wanted to mention is actually, as you touched the time. We are so busy and we don't have time. So that is what we are struggling for. And eventually, because of we do not have the time, we do not care. So we lose care because of we don't have time. So we don't care. We abuse it, we make use of that, and we try to make it as much as possible. So like we are going to eat as much as no care about other person. So because of being busy and no time, we don't care. Because of we do not care, we become immoral. We don't have to do anything. It intrinsically, naturally affects to the environment, and environment get polluted. So the air is being polluted, water is being polluted. It is easy to, because the environment has a beautiful nature of recuperating. It has itself to survive. Even the animals, when they get, that quite veterinaries are available at the present world, but it has its own process of recuperating their own problems. Environment is also the same. We have made a little bit complicated because of our expertise and no time.
I think that's a very good point. Our lives are probably very busy
and complicated.
And complicated and fast, and what human ingenuity has managed to do is to speed up our lives. If we read Jane Austen's novels and we think about no television, no radio, no telephones, and your transport was by horse-drawn carriage or horseback. In other words, horsepower was the only additional motion that you could get. People's lives were actually filled with not a huge amount. When a new person arrives in the village, the excitement involved is the equivalent of the archers, because that was a happening, something of moment which happened in the village. Many years ago, I travelled very widely in Iran, and I would visit a village, and the elders would send out for glasses of tea, and we would sit round and exchange news. And whatever I'd come to see them about was well down the order of priority. It was far more important to exchange niceties, to discuss matters which were not so important, but they were important in not being important, if you know what I mean. And I found that really very relaxing, and it made you feel at home. And it seems to me that we need to refine in ourselves that sort of interrelationship with our fellow human beings. And we can only do that with, in fact, periods of quiet and relaxation and contemplation, and that this room is probably one of the best places for it, because the Society of Friends seems to have the secret of it as well.
Yes, you said life was slower and now it's too fast. The other problem is that it's too short term. We only have the same amount of vision forward. The headlights see no further than they did before. And businesses are expected to grow every year. Everybody has targets. If the economy of the country has only grown by 1%, that's a disaster, they say. All this is short-termism. Maybe the function, the duty of the faith leaders is to look long-term and to impart to the politicians and the scientists and the business communities the merits of the longer vision which you've been expressing.
Very, very wise words. And temporary sort of holistic environmentalists would say growth is not sustainable.
Yes, yeah.
But it needs the faith leaders to say that so that it can be heard more widely.
And that even recession is cyclical and it's not a bad thing. We need that as a part of the economic cycle to have that. The story of Joseph in the Old Testament, in the Quran as well, of 7 years of abundance followed by 7 years of that. Coming to the issue of pace of life and all of that, there's a quotation from the book of one Ricardo Sandler in management. He's in Brazil, and he says 100 years ago in London the average speed of the horse carriage was 17 miles per hour. 100 years later we have hundreds of thousands of cars in London and the average speed is still 17 miles per hour. What is progress?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's a very good illustration, because how far have we actually advanced? What is important is that the wisdom imparted by books such as this, the Quran, and so on, those truths and that wisdom is as true today as it was 1,000 years and more ago.
What is important again, actually, the spiritual truth and the scientific truth are two different things. Spiritual truth came from the people who develop and cultivate themselves. They have foreseen many years in the future and they have predicted it in the right manner. That hardly been changed, or it is kind of eternal sayings about our environment and ourselves. But scientifics are always can be proven wrong and it can be changed. So, but today what the problem is actually, we rely more on scientific discoveries and the truth. Therefore we know about the spiritual truth about our environments. If we can bring that attitudes back into the holistic attitudes, then I think we can bring so much into the society.
Indeed.
I hear what you say, but in the past there was a lot of understanding of listening to spiritual leaders, through in the Holy Scriptures, in terms of the prophets of the time, that sort of were able to read the signs of the time and say this is what there is to come, or this is the way it should be lived, and whatever. In today, we've got a world that is not necessarily religious, or a lot of people are materialistic. But I find that, for instance, even a lot of the church leaders, in a sense, have in themselves become materialistic. And a lot of the focus of within the churches, not the teaching, not the teaching that's been inherited, but the way they practice it or the way they focus on it. It's become very materialistic. And it's almost, I see a lot of the scientists that have come to us with the warnings about the climate, with the warnings about the damage to the environment, as the prophets of our time. It was as if, for me, God gave up on religious leaders of the time to be the spokespersons in the world, and had to use scientists to wake the rest of us to what we were doing to ourselves and to his creation. And because I think God is quite capable of just, well, if you can't be bothered to listen to me, or if I can't use you, I'll go and use something else or someone else. And it's time that the very fact that we're talking about it, it's an example of how we've had to learn to listen to the prophets of our time, and the people, scientists they may be, that are waking up our awareness and our understanding to what we are doing to ourselves, what we're doing to the environment, and to what we're doing to God's creation. You know, his great gift, the gift of life and the gift of the environment we live in, sort of thing. So for me, I have a lot of respect. Okay, there are scientists and there are scientists, and there are scientists that are going down the road of very selfish developments and very selfish, what I call wasteful research and the sort of thing. But there are others that for me, they are speaking almost as if the voice of God to us, because of the message that they are sharing with us, even though they may not necessarily themselves be practicing faithful of any faith. You know, anyway.
Well, there are scientists who are believing Christians or Jews or whatever, but they are also scientists, and their faith and their beliefs inform the efforts they are making, in effect, on our behalf. And they don't see a conflict in those two, and I don't see a conflict in those two. And where religious belief is very personal to each of us, and although we live in communities, and communal worship is also very important, nonetheless, at the end of the day, it's for each individual to say, do I believe or don't I believe? But even the non-believers have probably had inculcated a lot of the principles that guide those of us who are believers. So this is why I feel some degree of confidence in all that's going on in that direction.
Yeah, and just to give an answer to that, I go back to what I explained at the very beginning, that in Islam there is the idea of fitra, which means that we have an essence. In this essence, there is by itself the covenants that we have made with God. We all have it. We are all born with it. We are all born with some sort of balance and harmony and justice within ourselves. So, as the world of science and the world of religions and the world of whatever kind of belief system that we would like to follow has by itself levels of awareness. So you will find people that are very, very aware because they are very connected to that essence. And you will find people that even within the so-called spiritual words like religion are not spiritual enough because they are not being able to connect to that essence. You see? So you will find that within the Jewish and the Muslims and a group of scientists, there might be people that connect, even though they are atheists, but there is an essence that connects them because they have been able to find an ethical way of living, or something that tells them what is right from what is wrong. I learned from a rabbi whose name is Ben Abraham Hansen. He lives in Jerusalem. He was telling me that in Judaism there is something that is called Islam that is exactly, is talking about that essence, that the covenant that was given to the Prophet Noah, and that all human beings have, as we are all born from this prophet, all of the generations well past. So we are all having that in ourselves, those ideas of what is right and what is wrong and how we should naturally. Now the words that we put into them or the ways that we act upon them might be different, but if we just scratch a little bit, we will find that in essence every single religion and even belief systems, if you want to say a political belief system or even a scientific approach into life, you will always find there is an essence that you can go and scratch and you will find there, which is the one that connects all of us and we should try to go back to.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've had a very interesting and stimulating day, and thank you very much for your contribution. It's been a most interesting day. I would like to thank my fellow speakers, Reverend Samitha, Ali Sharif, and I would like to thank you all for contributing so ably and interestingly to the debate. And of course, I would like to thank Linda and the Society of Friends for both enabling us to use this room and for providing material, nourishing support at the halfway stage. And I know that Linda would like us to finish with a short period of silence when we are free to think our own thoughts.